Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. Welcome to This Is Not a Test, episode 2. Joined tonight by Sir Gene. How you doing, buddy?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great. Doing great. Thanks for joining me
This is
here.
not a test, huh?
Yeah, that's what we're going with, at
Uh,
least for now. So, thanks for joining me here. We're starting a new series tonight. Little shout out to Joe Neerman, Good Logic. He was doing a stream the other night touching on some of these rules from rules for radicals, and kind of was the inspiration behind this stream, because for those of you who don't know, this book is basically the handbook for today's modern left. It is their modus operandum, literally written down on paper. Hillary Clinton did her senior thesis on this book. Barack Obama famously was a community organizer in Chicago. Community organizer is a job position activist thing that Saul Alinsky coined the term. So, these are major names in today's Democrat Party, and Saul Alinsky was their motivation. So real quick, hit that like button, share this out. Check me out on Twitter at Grifty IRL. I also have a Rumble and a Locals. Gene, you want to shout out your socials real quick?
well, the main one's probably just going to be Twitter, which is Sir Gene TX for Texas, and then I guess the podcast would be good, which is the Sir Gene Speaks podcast, podcast.sirgene.com. Pretty easy.
Okay. I have your Twitter and your YouTube in the description. I
Okay.
didn't have the link for the podcast
Yeah.
yet.
Okay.
I'll if you send that over to me in DMs, I'll get it in before
Sure.
the rebroadcast goes up, or before the
No
actual
worries.
video goes up. So, all right, I guess without further ado, let's get into this thing. So, here we go. Rules for Radicals by Saul Alinsky. So this book, this edition's from 1989. The original printing was in 1971. So that gives you a little bit of idea of time frame and stuff that we're dealing with.
So I'm going to be audience here. So what's your format for doing this series?
So I think what I'm gonna do is we're gonna go through, kind of read until we get to a point where we really want to highlight and drill down. Not sure if I'm gonna do the
Wait, you're
reading
going to read the
myself.
whole damn text?
Nah, we're gonna kind of skim. But that's why we're doing chapter by chapter. Each chapter is about 20 pages. They're not
Yeah.
super long. It's not a real in-depth book. So we're gonna go through.
So you're going to do 17 chapters worth of shows?
It's 10. It'll be 10 episodes. Yeah, it's 10 chapters total.
I think it's 17 chapters. Let me double check.
Not according to the table of contents here.
Really?
So yeah, so you got your prologue, and then you got 1, 2, 3, 4,
Okay,
5,
13.
6,
I got 13.
yeah. So yeah, we're gonna do one by one each week.
Okay.
I'm not sure if I'm gonna do this every week or twice a week. Haven't really locked it down yet. I got some other people that are tentatively scheduled. Still trying to lock down times for their episodes, but I think this thing's gonna be pretty big. I know it might seem a little tedious, particularly like this episode in the prologue, but I think it's really important to get to the bottom of this book, because you hear it brought up every once in a while in conservative circles. A lot of alt media content creators will like throw it around a little bit. They'll mention it, but I haven't seen a really great breakdown of this book that really kind of links it to what we're seeing nowadays. And I think going into 2024, going into the summer, I think if 2020 was any indication, I think we might be in trouble this summer with some repeats of the Summer of Love. And those things come straight from him. So I think if people have a better understanding of what is written in this book and where these people are getting their ideas from, I think it might help in winning this culture war we got out here, because your mind is being manipulated by very pragmatic psychological tactics that he goes into in these books. So I guess other
Well, I
than
mean, some
that,
of it is just ripped off from Sun Tzu.
it is. It's a lot of Sun Tzu. It's a lot of, what's the other book? 42 Rules. I think I forget the name of the book. It's not an original thought. I think the real key to this is it's distilled down to a very simple everyman level. Whereas Sun Tzu's, pretty heady. That other book I was talking about, also pretty heady. Those are tough reads.
No,
This
Sun
is
Tzu's a lot shorter. The Other War is a way shorter book.
shorter, but I don't know. Maybe because it's so old. At least the translations I've read are, they're not. I don't know. Not as there's a
Well,
lot of
keep in mind,
metaphor.
if you look at most Sun Tzu's that are sold, you have a paragraph of actual translation with a page and a half of here's what it means.
Right.
So it's like reading the Bible or something, where you have a small actual text and then a lot of descriptive. Here's what it actually means, and that's how it's a copyrighted book, because you can't copyright something that was written, all those years
Right.
ago.
Right.
So
Right.
if you want to publish Sun Tzu's Art of War, you're free to do so, but it's going to have your commentary, and that makes it a proprietary, unique book.
Got it. Got it. So, real quick, I think you and I were talking about this right before we got started. Actually, I think
Mhm.
it's kind of interesting to point out this dedication right here. The other
Oh
two
yeah,
are pretty
yeah,
simple stuff, but this one says, "Lest we forget at least an over-the-shoulder acknowledgement to the very first radical from all our legends, mythology, and history, and who is to know where mythology leaves off and history begins, or which is which." The
right.
first radical known to man who rebelled against the establishment and did it so effectively that he at least won his own kingdom, Lucifer.
Yeah.
So this book is literally dedicated to the biblical devil. That's the level of revolution that he's talking about in this book. That's going to be a key theme throughout the
Hmm.
book is revolution, um, not rhetoric. So it
Well, and that's a good point, because I think depending on which side of the revolution you're on, you're going to see your side and the other side in a particular context. So,
right,
Lucifer means bringer of light. And in a way, Lucifer is the one that allowed men to see the real world from the little aquarium they used to live in.
right.
So, again, it all depends on which side you want to present. And I think he's doing this more as a kind of a fuck you to, you know, everybody
It's
reading this. I don't
Yeah,
think
it's
he's in a
definitely meant to
Satanist, is
stir
my
the pot.
point.
No, I think it quite the opposite. Actually, I think there are hints to at least a small underlying element of Christianity in his writing. Actually, you get to it a little bit
Hmm.
later in the book with some of the stuff, but there's definitely, if nothing
Well, I'm
else,
pretty sure
there's
he's
a
Jewish.
he is probably Jewish. So, Abrahamic faiths.
Hmm.
But there's at least a very good understanding of those religions, because he does weaponize the opposition's morals
Hmm.
against them. That's
Yeah,
one of
yeah.
the things that he goes into. So, if nothing else, he's got a pretty good grasp on these faiths. So, let's dig in here. I don't know what the best way to do this is gonna be. Can you hear that?
No.
You
You
said
got the
no.
thing reading it? No, I can't.
I was trying to. So I guess
Okay.
we were not gonna do. I guess we're not gonna do that. So This first paragraph, the revolutionary force today has two targets, moral as well as material. Its young protagonists are one moment reminiscent of the idealistic early Christians, yet they also urge violence and cry, burn the system down. They have no illusions to the world, but plenty of illusions about the way to change our world. It is to this point that I have written this book. These words are written in desperation, partly because it is what they do and will do that will give meaning to what I and the radicals of my generation have done with our lives. So, like coming into this, he is pre 60s radical. He is a true McCarthy era radical. He goes down in the next paragraph, he goes into that and he says, few of us survived the Joe McCarthy Holocaust of the early 50s. And those that were even fewer, whose understanding and insights had developed beyond the dialectic of materialism, orthodox Marxism. So I think that's key. He like really shows his hand early here. He is a Marxist. He is a socialist. He despises communists. And the violent.
Wait, you said he's a Marxist who despises communists?
Correct. He is a orthodox Marxist. More, I'd say, more along the lines of Trotsky, because he goes on to really slam the Bolsheviks and the Chinese Red Guard and all of them for the way. Maybe not against communism, but the whole that isn't real communism argument, I guess.
Yeah, but that's literally the same argument every communist says.
Yeah. So, it is, but I think probably it starts kind of from him, is using that excuse, because up until then, you had the mainstream media and all defending the USSR. You had Walter Duranty writing cover articles for the USSR. So I mean it at this time in history,
or was he just telling the truth?
I don't know about that.
American propaganda started a long time ago, man.
That's true too. So this book is written to the next generation. Now, when
did you read this book?
I read this book.
You're still kind of young.
Yeah, I read this book for the first time probably in about 2015. I think I heard Sargon bring it up in the old Gamergate days. And that's what I said. Like, you always hear it kind of whispered around the periphery and people will mention it, but I just don't. I've never seen a good, real deep dive into the actual text of the book. And I think that's important. It's kind of like the Communist Manifesto. Everybody wants to reference the Communist Manifesto.
That's a hard read, man. A lot of people just cannot read that title.
It's a very hard read, but it's kind of in that same look. People want to throw the title around, but they've never actually read the book.
Exactly. Now, I read this the first time, I think, in 1987. Okay. So still fairly young. I mean, the book was, well, so was I, but the book was not that old. And I read it about the same time that I read Atlas Shrugged. So it was a good a good counter sampling of literature.
Yeah, it's a yin and yang intake of information.
Well, I was reading a lot of controversial stuff at the time. I kind of decided I was gonna. Kind of like you said, it's like you hear stuff mentioned enough that at some point, at least if you have my personality, you want to actually stop hearing bits and pieces, but read the whole goddamn thing.
Exactly. And I guess that's kind of my hopes with this series. Like, it's at times it's going to drone on. It's going to be a little tough, but I think for the people that at least don't have the patience to sit down and read the whole book, they can take this in, bit by bit. I'll go back through and I'll clip out some really good points to make his independent videos. And it's going to be my hope for it is that it's a reference point for
Mhm.
people to use, either, in their daily life, fighting, out in the political realm or the social justice realm, or for other content creators to be able to reference, this book, this series as a reference material, instead of having to actually take the time to read the book.
Mhm.
They can just pull up a chapter and digest it slowly. So that's kind of the goal. But you can see as we go through here, there's your very typical socialist words. You got your bourgeois, your materialism. um he doesn't shy away from the jargon or anything like that. He really just seems to be trying to put a buffer between himself and your Lenins, your Mao's, your Ho Chi Minh's, stuff like that. They don't want he doesn't want that weight on him. This is the very end of the Cold War, getting towards it. This version came out the year the Berlin Wall fell.
Yeah, I was gonna say
So,
71 wasn't, but
comparatively to the length of the Cold War, you're 30 years into it with 15 years left till the first Eastern European countries start falling. So you're definitely 2/3 of the way through it.
yeah.
And the worst atrocities. When was Gulag Archipelago published? Because that would have
Uh,
probably been around the same time. I think
yeah.
I should have pulled that
Yeah,
up.
maybe just a tad before.
Yeah, but early 70s, early to mid 70s is when the real, like, the first part of the Iron Curtain started to fall, and you started to get people coming over, like Ayn Rand, becoming public from
Yeah,
behind,
so the
from the
last one was
Soviet.
68 for the Gulag
Yes.
Archipelago.
So this is 3 years after that.
Yeah.
Or, so he's got to answer these. This is the first, this is the time frame where these leftists had to answer those claims for the first time. Up until then, they had cover, they
Right.
had, but at this point in time, the curtains were starting to open up over there, and people were realizing, oh crap, it's horrible.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point. Is in the early 70s, it became increasingly more difficult to pretend that the Soviet Union and to some extent China were doing as well as the West, because
right.
clearly they were not.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I think that was a big, obviously we can only guess what was in his head, but from the way he writes this book, I feel like that was a big goal of this book, was to be the first real pivot away from supporting Lenin and Stalin and Mao and the USSR and the
Yeah.
Chinese Revolution, and to turn it to this Western socialism that we
Yep.
have today.
I got the same thing from that. Yep.
Yep. So, but he goes through and he breaks it down, and it's so funny to read some of this. This line was very interesting to me here. It could have been written in the 90s. It could have been written in the 80s. These talking points are what they are. But right here, where he says they've talking about the youth of the day, they've rejected their materialistic backgrounds and
Mhm.
goal of a well-paid job, suburban home, automobile, country club
Mhm.
membership, first class travel, status, security, everything that meant success to their parents. I mean, that's every generation. That's
Yeah.
yeah. He's just speaking to the college age kids, just like they do today with
Exactly. Yeah.
with the gender stuff and the
And
the
it is sort of an NLP, neuro linguistic programming here too.
yeah
Because what he's doing is he's using words specifically directed at a particular group who he understands, in order to make that seem that it's specifically speaking about them. But he's not speaking about them. He's speaking about any cohort that fills that demographic. And so
Right.
their parents would have been equally susceptible to this had he written the book 20 years prior. Or
And
20 years later, the kids definitely are.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's, but the wording is like, hey, I'm talking about exactly you.
Right.
And this is good NLP. And the way it works is it really personalizes the message to the person, even though the person making the message is fairly generic.
And I think that's why this book has proved so timeless over the
Mhm.
generations for the radical left. They can hand this book to any college freshman who's mad at their parents and, convert them much quicker than they can by handing them the Communist Manifesto. Like you said, that's a hard read. This one, not so much. So credit to him. I mean, he's definitely a good writer. You know, he gets his points across, but there's a lot of underlying psychology, like you were talking about, with how he writes it, so that it just transfers on to everybody else, and future generations. So you can't underestimate it. I think that's why it's so important to really dig into it, because there's something to be said about knowing your enemy, and this is what they use. And there's tactics in here. They're effective. Like, they are effective. These same tactics can be utilized by the right. And you have seen it some with the Tea Party utilize some of his teachings. The MAGA movement utilized some of his tactics. So,
yeah, well, and again, they're not new or innovative tactics. For sure.
They're not.
But
they're not.
Do you the thing? How much do you know about his background?
I know a little, but not a ton.
Okay.
I know he was, peripherally involved with the American version of, like, the Fabian Society and stuff like that. And what was it, the Frankfurt School of like psychology and education and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure he was linked to them as well. Like I said, I don't know a ton on his actual biography. So if you got something to add there.
Well, no, I was just going to mention that he was a philosophy major in college.
Okay.
As was I, which is, a person that likes to talk a lot and hear themselves win arguments. So
right.
he had that personality. Now, I also have the beard of Karl Marx, so that makes me one step better.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah, I don't need to wear a costume for Halloween, man.
Well, there you go. All right, let's keep pushing on here. Let's see. They've seen almost unbelievable idiocy of our political leadership. In the past, political leaders, ranging from mayors to governors to the White House, were regarded with respect and almost reverence. Today, they are viewed with contempt. This, and again, it just it transfers generation to generation. Everything he's saying, it really does, but his solutions are where the problem comes in. His diagnosis isn't bad. And, a lot of socialist diagnosis of situations isn't bad. It's the solutions where the problems come in, and,
right.
The gulags develop. So, all right.
Yep.
I'm getting an echo.
Oh, you are? Oh, okay.
Yeah, it just started.
Let me take a look. All right, let me turn on echo cancellation. How's that?
Check. That's better. All right, good. We're good.
All right.
So this negativism now extends to all institutions, from police and the courts to the system itself. We are living in a world of mass media which daily exposes society's innate hypocrisy, its contradictions, and the apparent failure of almost every facet of our social and political life. The young have seen their activist participatory democracy turn into its antithesis, nihilistic bombing and murder. So, speaking there, and he goes into it a little later, this is right in the time of the Weathermen and, what was the Puerto Rican group? that was doing all the bombings
I
in
don't
the
recall.
yeah, but there was, you know, for all the talk of insurrections and stuff like that lately, the late 60s, early 70s were by far like head and shoulders more uh unstable in the United States. You had actual bombings of buildings, you had representatives being shot on the floor of the
Hmm.
Capitol. Like it the 2000 teens and 20s don't have anything on the 60s and 70s.
No, it was
And
definitely a more violent era, I think. A lot, I would say probably less rhetoric and more violence. The social media has really cranked up the rhetoric a lot.
it has. It has. And that's one of the scary things is because it's you the outward shows of violence back then is kind of what kept people turned off from a lot of these ideas. It's why you had movies like Red Dawn being made and stuff like that, where they, the majority of America felt like the communists were bad people
Hmm.
because it was in their face. And because of this book, they pulled those tactics back. They
Hmm.
stopped the bombings, they stopped the assassinations, and they worked within the system, and he goes into that here in a little bit about you have to work within the system. So, and this is where he goes on to talk about Russia and China. It says the political panaceas of the past, such as the revolutions in Russia and China, have become the same old stuff under a different name. The search for freedom does not seem to have any road or destination. The young are inundated with a barrage of information and facts so overwhelming that the world has come to seem an utter bedlam, which has them spinning in a frenzy, looking for what man has always looked for from the beginning of time: a way of life that has some meaning or sense. A way of life means a certain degree of order where things have some relationship and can be pieced together in a system that at least provides some clues to what life is about. Um, so there you go again. Like he's laying it out right there. It's youthful angst that he's targeting.
Right.
And
But he's politicizing it. I mean, you could
exactly.
literally write
He's
the
weaponizing
same.
it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because you could write the exact same thing in a psychology book about the general attitudes and problems of college kids and
Right.
not have any political bent to it whatsoever. It's like, well, yeah, this is the kind of stuff that college kids feel. This is what they're likely to lash out against. And what he's doing, it like you said, is weaponizing it for a political purpose. And I
Right.
think the for somebody that and he was born in like 1909 or 1910 or something, so old dude. For somebody that had lived through the rise of communism in Russia as a kid, and then World War I, World War II, the rise of communism in China, and progressively has seen the arguments against communism become actually easier to make because of the failings of those two systems.
Right.
That would be quite upsetting if I was in his shoes. And so
Absolutely.
the natural response is like, well, they did it wrong, even though they're literally half a billion people trying communism. All of
Right.
those half a billion people between China and Russia did it wrong. I
Right.
can do it better. That's the attitude, and it's actually it's a fairly narcissistic position to start a book from.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. It definitely is. You could take as an anarchist. I've done a lot of reading on like Emma Goldman and stuff like that. When she went to Russia and saw how things were being handled and sat down and actually spoke with Lenin, and she came back and just destroyed them.
Hmm.
But she didn't go this route. Like she disavowed that goal and moved to a much more libertarian anarchist support of
Yeah.
of the workers and stuff like that. He repackaged the same ideas in a much prettier shell. Was his goal. So that's the big difference between them, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So give me a second here. A little bit. Okay.
Yeah, you don't have to zoom in so much. Like, it's still readable when it's like this.
Yeah, I'm just trying to move the windows around. I wish I had a second screen. I really do. It would make life so much easier, but I don't yet. So until then. But he goes on, he goes on to dig into more of that search for meaning. This is what men's always wanted. Stuff like that. But I think a key line down here at the end is this last sentence in this paragraph. He says, "This is what's behind the common cliche, getting it all together. Despite the realization that all values and factors are relative, fluid, and changing, and that it will be possible to get it all together only relatively. The elements will shift and move together just like the changing pattern in a turning kaleidoscope." This right here, this one sentence right here, is the root of intersectionality in the modern left. All of your Kimberly Crenshaws, everybody, behind the intersectional movement and gender theory and critical race theory and all these things that are the top, hot button topics today. This line is where they come from. This is where it's my truth. I'm telling my truth, the relativeness, the fluidity of things. It really stems from this line. It's really crucial that people understand like how old these talking points are, how long they've had to refine them. Compared to the MAGA movement or libertarians or your right wing ANCAPs and stuff like that. A lot of their historical, for lack of a better word, texts and stuff have gone unread, for the most part in academics, in childhood, growing up. They don't talk about it. The internet has really brought a lot of that back, which is good, but this stuff has run through the system for 50 years, and it's just been all the rough, unnecessary aspects of it have just been polished off over time until it's a finely honed blade now, and that's why it's so effective. That's why they take over every institution they get to, because they've been running real life tests on these theories for 50 plus years. So it's definitely something we don't want to overlook.
Yep.
So he goes on to explain how the world used to be smaller and simpler, and because of technology and stuff like that, it's a much wider world. He says, what sense does it make for men to walk on the moon while other men are waiting in welfare lines, or in Vietnam killing and dying for a corrupt dictatorship in the name of freedom? Which is funny. Even then the leftists were referring to the US as dictatorships and authoritarians, doing their deflection that they do today. So it's
Hey, I want to try something. Let's see if this works.
All right.
The establishment in many ways is as suicidal as some of the far left, except
Can you
that
hear
they
anything?
are infinitely more destructive than the far
I can
left
hear that.
can ever be.
It's a little quiet, right?
It was
Or is
okay.
that about the same as me?
It came through.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a little bit under you, but
I've
not too much.
I've got my text to speech done by a Russian chick, so there's a little
I
accent.
heard that. I heard that.
Yeah, it just reminds me of past life here.
Well, yeah, that works, and I'll just kind of scroll along if you want to throw some, do paragraph.
Yeah,
by
I mean, I've caught
paragraph
up.
with her.
I can see where you're at now. So it's just so what I can do is just hit read, and then you can interrupt when you want to jump in, and
All right,
I'll
that'll
just
work.
stop it if either you or I want to jump in.
That'll work.
Okay. So let's see where we are here.
Today's
you wanna start?
generation faces
Yeah.
all this and says, I don't want to spend my life the way my family and their friends have. I want to do something, to create, to be me, to do my own thing, to live. The older generation doesn't understand and worse doesn't want to. I don't want to be just a.
Let me change it to a normal voice because it's going to
On
drive
the
some
other
people
side is
crazy.
the older
I
generation
don't mind,
Probably.
but I think for some people they'll be like insane.
If they
Yeah,
are as vocal
the
or tired out,
contractions seem to be giving
maybe
it a little
because they
hell.
can escape
Uh-huh.
to a past when the world was
simpler. They can still cling to the old values in the simple hope that
There
everything
you
will
go.
work out somehow, some way. That the younger generation will straighten out with the passing of time. Unable to come to grips with the world as it is, they retreat in any to grips with the world as it is. They retreat in any confrontation with the younger generation with that infuriating cliche, when you get older you'll understand.
So that's I think a very, again, good NLP here, because he's using a phrase that is literally universal. Any language has this phrase. When you get older, or when you get to be my age, you will understand. You're on mute, by the way.
Sorry about that. Yeah, and every child hates it.
Oh, of course, because it's not something that you can. It's basically saying it'll take you 20 years for you to be able to understand what I'm saying.
Right. And it instills resentment, because I know, at least me, as I was growing up, if someone said that to me, I'd be like, well, if you understand, I'm not stupid.
Exactly.
Explain it to me.
Yeah. It's a total cop-out line. And
it is.
The best example I remember, and my comeback when I was young to that line, was that, well, that's interesting, because when I was reading, I can't remember the name of the book, but it was one of Einstein's books. That was not a math book. It was like an actual book. But he talked about how important it is to be able to find language that can describe complex things in simple terms, to get the next generation excited and interested, and to be able to move things beyond the level at which the current generation has them. So whenever I heard somebody using this phrase, which for sure happened to me when I was young,
right,
I had a smart ass reply to it. It's like, well, it's too bad that you're not as smart as Einstein there, buddy, because otherwise you could explain it. So what you're saying is you're admitting your own stupidity right now by telling me that I need to be your age to understand it. Okay, fair enough.
Yep.
So good call on Saul's part to trigger the kids.
Yep, and he's got a good argument to it. And the next part, he goes into what a good older generation would do when speaking to the youth, and he hits both sides of the coin. And by lumping them together,
he also makes a joke there too, which is pretty funny.
He does. But by lumping them together, he almost discredits the right approach by having it mashed up with the wrong approach, and doing the wrong approach first. The college age kid is already, for lack of a better word, triggered when they hear that next part just kind of scoops right over the top, and they don't pick it up. So
one wonders at their reaction if some youngster were to reply, when you get younger, which will never be, then you'll understand. So of course you'll never understand. Those of the older generation who claim a desire to understand say, when I talk to my kids, or their friends, I'll say to them, look, I believe what you have to tell me is important, and I respect it. You call me a square, and say that TM not with it, or I don't know where it's at, or I don't know where the scene is, and all of the rest of the words you use.
So he's got some very 1970s language there.
He does. That's
You're a square, where the scene's at. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the few areas of the text that dates the material and kind of breaks you out of that modern relevance, but it's not bad enough that it really matters. It's nostalgic. He happened to pick the phrases that turned into nostalgia, particularly with like the you're a square, and stuff like that.
They're very dated.
Yeah,
it's a piece of language that did not catch on permanently.
Use. Well, I'm going to agree with you. So suppose you tell me. What do you want? What do you mean when you say, I want to do my thing? What the hell is your thing? You say you want a better world. Like what? And don't tell me a world of peace and love and all the rest of that stuff, because people are people. As you will find out when you get older. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say anything about when you get older.
Yes, there's his joke, his little
Yep.
tongue-in-cheek thing.
Older. I really do respect what you have to say. Now why don't you answer me? Do you know what you want? Do you know what you're talking about? Why can't we get together? Prologue 17, and that is what we call the generation gap.
Right.
What
So
the
right
present
there.
generation wants.
So right there, he goes through, and the way he describes that is how you start a productive conversation with a college age young adult. Is you do respect them, you apologize when you slip up, even though he means it as a joke right here, and you ask questions, but he just glosses over it. He doesn't say, this is the type of person you want to talk to and bounce off ideas off of. He just jumps straight to, and that is what we call the generation gap.
Right.
So that's what I was saying about, like, he discredits the latter half by linking it to the first half so closely at the end of that paragraph. So
Yep.
Is what all Generatians have always wanted, a meaning, a sense of what the world and life are, a chance to strive for some sort of order. If the young were now writing our Declaration of Independence, they would begin.
I figured this would
When
sound
in the
more like
course of
him.
inhuman events, and their bill of particulars would range from Vietnam to our black, Chicano, and Puerto Rican ghettos, to the migrant workers, to Appalachia, to the hate, ignorance, disease, and starvation in the world. Such a bill of particulars would emphasize the absurdity of human affairs and the forlornness and emptiness, the fearful loneliness that comes from not knowing if there is any meaning to our lives. When they talk of values, they're
and
asking
there,
for a reason.
In that paragraph, you can see starting to break down the racial groups, the black community, the Chicano and the Puerto Rican ghettos, migrant workers. It's funny that back then they included Appalachia. Nowadays, even if you live in Appalachia, you're still
you're privileged.
Absolutely.
White folk. You goddamn privileged person.
Per capita, that is still to this day the poorest region in our country. Well,
and to be fair, at the time of writing in 1971, Vietnam, you were probably making like 5 cents an hour. Blacks were definitely making less money than white people. Chicanos probably not working the same job, so similar. Appalachia, just poor ass miners mostly.
Yep.
So he's really not basing it on race so much as poverty.
Well, it's class. It's class warfare.
But it is absolutely. It's class warfare. Well,
it's Marxism.
If he likes Marx, it's going to be class warfare. Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is always that the people that like Marx they discount or they forget to mention the fact that Marx wasn't even middle class. Marx was very, very rooted in upper class.
Oh, he was as bourgeois as it got.
He was, he was basically a trust fund kid who never had to work a day in his life, whose dad owned a large factory.
Yep.
And his pastime was commenting about things he didn't like about his father.
Yep.
That's Marxism.
Reason. They are searching for an answer, at least for a time, to man's greatest question. Why am I here? The young react to their chaotic world in different ways. Some panic and run, rationalizing that the system is going to collapse anyway of its own rot and corruption, and so they're copping out, going hippie or yippie, taking drugs, trying communes, anything to escape. Others went for pointless sure-loser confrontations so that they could fortify their rationalization and say, well, we tried and did our part. And then they copped out too. Others, sick with guilt and not knowing where to turn or what to do, went berserk. These were the weathermen and their like. they took the grand cop-out, suicide. To these I have nothing to say or give but pity, and in some cases contempt, for such as those who leave their dead comrades and take off for Algeria or other points. What I have to say in this book is not the arrogance prologue 18 of
So,
unsolicited
so
advice.
right there is where he's distancing himself from the Weathermen and says they're worthy of nothing but pity and contempt. I think if I'm not mistaken, wasn't Bill Ayers one of the ones that ran off to Algeria?
I think you're right. I'm not 100%, but I think you're right.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a little underhanded dig at Bill Ayers right there. And which is funny because he also became a mentor to Hillary and Barack and Bill and a lot of the modern left.
Yeah. Well, and
so
but both of these guys are from Chicago, so that makes sense.
oh yeah, as is Obama, and isn't Hillary, didn't she go to school in Chicago?
I thought it was on the East Coast. I can't remember.
It might have been.
I know she was working for Nixon's White House.
Yeah.
All right.
Advice. Yeah. It is the experience and counsel that so many young people have questioned me about through all-night sessions on hundreds of campuses in America. It is for those young radicals who are committed to the fight, committed to life. Remember, we are talking about revolution, not revolution. You can miss the target by shooting too high as well as too low. First, there are no rules for revolution any more than there are rules for love or rules for happiness. But there are rules for radicals who want to change
there's kind of rules for happiness.
There are certain central concepts of action in human politics that operate regardless of the scene or the time. To know these is basic to a pragmatic attack on the system. These rules make the difference between being a realistic radical and being a rhetorical one who uses the tired old words and slogans.
This is funny too.
Pig, or white fascist racist, or motherfucker.
So he's saying don't call people pig or white fascist racist or motherfucker, which is kind of what Antifa's doing nonstop.
Well, it's funny. So without, spoiler warning of where he goes on with this, he's not saying don't do it. He's saying don't do it yet. He goes in to talk about working within the system, and you have to build a general rumbling within the populace of these problems before you actually attack them. So it's more of a not yet, and what I think what we're seeing today is more of the end game of some of these tactics that were started back in the 70s and have expanded over the last 50 years. Is they have sowed that resentment in enough of the population, most of the minority population of America, all of the left-wing white population of America are, they believe these things now. So now when you say them, it's not repulsive to a majority of people.
It's just to half the people.
It's only repulsive to your enemies, and it works as a way to identify them. Versus slowing down your cause, now it identifies your enemies. So I just think it's funny to see these phrases, these words in a book 50 years ago, and now these are the talking points.
Yeah, no, you're right. 50 years. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Motherfucker. And has so stereotyped himself that others react by saying, "Oh, he's one of those," and then promptly turn off. This failure of many of our younger activists to understand the art of communication has been disastrous. Even the most elementary grasp of the fundamental idea that one communicates within the experience of his audience and gives full respect to the other's values.
So there he's literally talking about what he's doing.
Right.
Communicating within the experience of his audience. He's communicating to college kids, talking about things that are universal to college kids.
Values would have. ruled out attacks on the American flag. The responsible organizer would have known that it is the establishment that has betrayed the flag, while the flag, itself, remains the glorious symbol of America's hopes and aspirations, and he would have
What's that
conveyed this
noise?
message to his audience.
My
On another level of
notifications, sorry.
communication, humor is essential, for through humor much is accepted that would have been rejected if presented seriously. This is a sad and lonely generation. It laughs too little, and this, too, is tragic.
So you could totally describe Gen Z the way he just did.
Yeah, everything. It's so so I've been obviously preparing for the series. I've been rereading it, the last couple of days, and it still is a shock to the system how relevant it still is.
Mhm.
And you can see the areas, if you look back at the stuff over the last couple of years that's happened in our country, the areas where the left has gotten the pushback, kneeling for the anthem, stuff like that, he calls it out here. Like, the man is smart. He's not an idiot. So even if a lot of the people nowadays aren't the brightest in the book, brightest bulb on the porch,
Yep.
they're working from a playbook written by a very, very intelligent man. And the only time they tend to fumble is where they stray from what he laid out for them,
Right.
like kneeling for the flag and stuff like that. It's very eerie reading this book.
Mhm. Yeah, but also keep in mind, just there is a certain bias that develops for anyone that reads text a long time after it's been written, because it's confirmation bias. So effectively, you're wanting to see the person. Oh my gosh, how did they know this stuff? Well, they didn't, and he meant
Right.
something totally different. But the words are close enough to what you're thinking of that to you it sounds like, holy shit, he was predicting the future.
Right, because he's talking the burning of the flags during
Yeah.
the protests against the Vietnam War.
Right. And he's basically saying that that's not a smart thing to do, because what you want to do is not go against the symbol. What you want to go against is the greed and corruption and the filth and all the other crap that's taken this country away from that, what the symbol stands for. And if we truly want to go after what the symbol represents, well, then you need to read Marx.
Right.
So that, I think, at least I hope I'm giving him a correct interpretation here.
Tragic.
Yeah, and
Prologue
obviously
19 for the real
this is all just our opinions on this stuff. Other people are gonna have different opinions.
Yeah. Well, they'll be wrong, but that's
right.
Radical, doing his thing, is to do the social thing, for and with people. In a world where everything is so interrelated that one feels helpless to know where or how to grab hold and act, defeat sets in. For years there have been people who found society too overwhelming and have withdrawn, concentrated on doing their own thing. Generally, we have put them into mental hospitals and diagnosed them as schizophrenics. If the real radical finds that having long hair sets up psychological barriers to
So when I read that, or this time around, and not the first time around, I started thinking, it was like, oh boy, that sounds like Ted Kaczynski.
Right. Yeah. That's a manifesto that.
Yeah, you should go through that one.
Aged well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
now talk about smart dudes. That guy was one of the most brilliant people in the country.
Hey, his ideas were pretty well targeted. His tactics, not so much.
Yeah, but I think that there is clear blame to be laid at the foot of the government for the tactics. But the ideas were, I think, an outgrowth of his incredible intellect. I mean, he had 160 plus IQ. He finished college at like 14. He became a professor at 18. I was just like insanely smart guy, like, and then real genius.
And then just isolated in the woods of Alaska, and like
I don't think it was Alaska.
Was it not? I thought it was.
I think it was Montana or something.
Oh, okay, okay. But
or
way out in the
Washington State.
woods.
So- in the
Yeah,
woods. Yeah, somewhere in the woods.
way out in the woods.
Mhm.
And just worked this theory that is pretty also spot on to where the world has gone with the
Yeah.
technology and
Well,
the
and I think that's a danger for somebody when you're capable of having insight that turns out to be correct based on really good analysis. There's a certain danger in acting on that insight as though it was inevitable. I don't know what the hell he's doing. Checking his back door, apparently. All right. So, acting on that insight as though it was inevitable to happen. And
right.
if you determine that based on factors that you're seeing, like today I was at the store and it looked like the milk shelf was almost completely empty. Right. If I take that data in and I do some fancy calculations in my head and I determine that this country has now been taken over China, I need to go and personally on a mission of Rambo to China to fix
Right.
this problem. Right. So I may be completely correct in my analysis, but I'm incorrect in my solution or the eventual decision of what to do based on that analysis. And I think
Exactly.
if Kaczynski could have stopped at the analysis, he would have had a bunch of New York Times best-selling novels or books, not novels, like nonfiction books. He would have been probably in all the places that Jordan Peterson is right now.
Yeah.
He would have
for
been
sure.
a celebrated, not really a
Intellectual.
conservative dude, because he was never a conservative, but
No.
he would be the darling of conservatives right now
Yep.
instead of being in prison.
It would be. It would
So
be.
it's that action based on the analysis that led to the problem, not the analysis itself.
Yeah, even with, the making stuff go boom. I'm not sure how the algorithm likes the
Yeah, I don't
B
think it
word.
likes it.
So even with that and all, you still hear a decent amount of people on the right, like we are right now,
Mhm.
giving praise to his thoughts, his intellect, his
Mhm.
his manifesto, without still keeping that distance from
Oh,
the
yeah.
crimes he committed, because
Of course.
that's not how you win the hearts and minds of the American public.
But
You
you
just
have to be able to, if you can't do that, you need to learn how. Like, you can both say that Hitler was an absolutely horrible human being and did an immense amount of evil, and also see that it was clear to see why the German people loved him, because he
yeah
improved Germany. He took
yeah
a post World War I German economy that was an absolute shitter and brought it into a very healthy, dynamic economy. And that, for the majority of German people, not all of them, obviously, improved their lives, not made their lives worse. And that's the thing, is
right.
being able to see the actions of people separately from the actions that the same people could have done, but had different outcomes. So if you just paint Hitler as nothing but evil, then you throw away an awful lot of information that you should be learning about what led up to him actually gaining power. Because while there's certainly some shenanigans going on in order to get him in power, it wasn't all shenanigans. Same thing with Lenin. There was definitely shenanigans going on, but there
Right.
was also a genuine there was a genuine, not so much a dislike, but a unresolved problems with the Russian Tsar.
Yeah.
Like there was some incidents that happened that a bunch of people ended up getting killed in that were not planned, and they were bad decisions, and they weren't even made by the Tsar. But of course, as the head of the country, he was the one that ends up being responsible ultimately for it.
All the
And
credit,
so,
all the blame.
yeah, and so a lot of people were in a position of very much being pissed off just enough to want to change things around. So anyway, let's get back to this. I'm pontificating.
Communication and organization, he cuts his hair. If I were organizing in an Orthodox Jewish community, I would not.
Actually, let's reread
If the
this.
real radical finds that having long hair sets up psychological barriers to communication and organization, he cuts his hair. If I were organizing in an Orthodox Jewish community, I would not walk in there eating a ham sandwich, unless I wanted to be rejected so I could have an excuse to cop out. My thing, if I want to organize, is solid communication with the people in the community. Lacking communication, I am in reality silent. Throughout history, silence has been regarded as assent, in this case, assent to the system. As an organizer, I start from where the world is, as it is, not as I would like it to be. That we accept the world as it is does not in any sense weaken our desire to change it into what we believe it should be. It is necessary to begin where the world is if we are going to change it to what we think it should be. That means working in the system.
Yeah, I'm pausing there. So he said a bunch of interesting stuff here.
He did. It's a very juicy section there.
Mhm.
And again, another area where you can see the modern radicals have kind of branched off from his advice, and they're getting the pushback. You know, I see a lot of ties to like the drag story hours and the
Yeah.
you know, crazy blue hair and all that stuff, like right here, like they lost the plot of the playbook.
Yeah. No, exactly. And this section, he talks basically about adapting to your opponents and
Right.
saying that things like your physical appearance are secondary to your commitment to the ideas. So if your ideas are ones that you want to push forward, don't show up looking like an asshole.
Exactly.
Cut your
Because
hair.
no one's gonna take you
tattoos.
serious.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to play the part of the people that you're communicating to. So if you were actually born in Africa instead of Hawaii and you want to become president of the United States, you got to pretend like you're a Chicago native. Sorry, I just had to throw that in there. This is also the section where he is definitely stealing from Sun Tzu, book 1, I think, about 15 through chapter 15 through 18 there, or paragraph 15 through 18.
Right.
So very, very, but you know what they say, it's like, what's the saying? Writers, or good writers write well, the great writers steal. Something like that. I can't remember the saying, but there's a funny saying about stealing as a writer.
Well, and in a way, it's what I was talking about these ideas are so old that they're like a stone in a river. You know, when it went in, it was rough and it was jagged and it wasn't anything special. But after years of being worn down and all the, you know, non-essential parts of that stone get beaten away, you're left with this perfectly smooth, you know, river rock that, you know, if it's made of a, you know, a special mineral or something like that, is something beautiful to behold. It's the same type of stuff with these ideas, whether it be Sun Tzu or Marxism or, you know, even at this point, Saul Alinsky's books, you know, Rules for Radical. He's just one step in that stuff being, you know, polished over time. And that's like I said, that's why they're so effective today. Their ideas are on an organized level more linearly attached throughout time. The thing about freedom and anarchy or libertarianism or republicanism is there's not that linear progression. It, you know, it's patches of ideas. You know, you have your you know, founding fathers, then you have, Murray Rothbard, or you have Ayn Rand, and there's these independent circles of thought, and it takes them a while to blend them into a cohesive ideology. So I think that's just really what we need to realize is we're up against something that they've been refining for a long time. 100 years, 100
Well,
years since Marx.
Yeah, but I think there's a couple of factors. First of all, nothing here can't be used by the right.
Correct.
If you go through all 12, 13 of whatever number of rules, he's got 11 rules. Go through
Right.
his 11 rules. Every one of them can be used either as is or just adapted slightly and be utilized by the right.
Yeah.
It's really not a big deal. The other thing is, I remember this from the 90s in college where I would say the teachers that I had in the early 90s, so they would have been like in their 40s and 50s in the 90s, so they would have been like born in around World War II.
They would have been the college students that he was talking to.
Yes, exactly right. That's exactly right. So they would have been the ones that were the first generation to see themselves in this writing. And the ones, and this is a well-known fact, that people that go to college and then never leave, they stay to get their masters and doctorates and become college professors.
Right.
They've never worked a real job in their life. They've been permanently in college. In some ways, that is referred to clinically as arrested development. We have people who have stopped their socialization in college and have stayed in college. Now they're making money. They've matured financially, and they've matured in terms of, probably getting married, all the normal sort of stuff that happens. But in a lot of ways, they do demonstrate this arrested development, which means that these ideas have never stopped resonating with them. They still think like college students, even though they're now college professors. They're now driving Volvos, God forbid American cars, because Americans are, it's an evil empire, so they would drive Volvos usually. You could always tell a socialist professor by the Volvo they drove. Saab, well, either a Saab or a Volvo. Yes, Subaru probably more on the West Coast, but yeah, definitely Volvos and Subarus were very, very popular.
Yeah,
they kind of, it's that whole kind of those Norse countries where they understand socialism really well and they know how to make a good car.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The ones that shout out, please stop saying we're socialists.
Yeah.
We're actually rolling this stuff backwards.
So it was becoming evident then, but obviously it's gotten worse and worse with each generation, because what you have now are college professors who were taught by college professors who were taught by this guy. So you have 3 generations removed now of college professors teaching, kids that are Zoomers going through college right now, the same kind of stuff. So it's like 3rd generational arrested development.
Right.
All right.
System. There's another reason for working inside the system. Dostoevsky said that taking a new step is what people fear most. Any revolutionary change must be preceded by a passive, affirmative, non-challenging attitude toward change among the mass of our people. They must feel so frustrated, so defeated, so lost, so featureless in the prevail-ing system that they are willing to let go of the past and chance the future. This acceptance is the Reformation essential to any revolution.
So that's a very important part here as well. And this is kind of a truism, and it's been observable for many years, is that if you want to overthrow the government to what you want, you first need to have a general calamity. You need to have something that enables you to install the government that you want as a solution to the calamity. This happened in Ukraine in 2014. This happened in Soviet Russia in 1917. You can look at any major revolution, and I haven't studied China enough. I'll tell you that right now to tell you exactly how it happened with Mao. But I'm pretty sure that
Right.
if you do enough research, you will find that it happened the same way as well, to where there was an event that was a triggering point that could be utilized by the people that eventually became the victors. And
Right.
in the Russian Revolution, their name of this group was called the Bolsheviks, which means the bigger ones or the big
Right.
ones, because they were literally the smallest party. So it was a counter directional name, if you will, a way to take somebody who was actually very small and not horribly significant, and then present them as like, oh, well, they're the majority. It's
Right.
sort of like people calling themselves like the moral majority or something, even though they
Exactly.
represent a minority of the people.
From like back in the 90s, Tipper Gore and all them with their parental advisory stickers.
Yep, exactly, because that's clearly the thing that's going to crush America is rap lyrics.
Well, that's the funny thing about, people my age and older. Like we won this battle once against political correctness, against all this garbage that we're seeing now. We won this battle in the 90s. We really did. Like, there was no appetite for this back then. It's social media and the algorithms that feed off rage, that have allowed this to take hold at this point in time again.
Yeah, well, and I would certainly put the communist witch hunts of the FBI as another variant of the same kind of political correctness, because if somebody today wants to take somebody else down, they just call them, a trans hater, Nazi, white, a fascist or whatever.
Right.
Back then, they would have done a similar thing, except it would have had a communist flavor to it.
Hey, I still maintain McCarthy did nothing wrong.
Yeah, well, you can keep doing that. I'm not.
I
think
he was right about just about every major person in the administration that he claimed was a communist, and they turned back and were like, oh, no. Like, he was right about a lot of them.
About the ones that you heard about that actually were. There were plenty of people
Alger
they were wrong
Hist.
about.
Oh, yeah, no. It's
a very, very broad brush. Guys like Charlie Chaplin were
the raking of, I guess let me hammer down on that a little bit. I separate out the persecution of Hollywood and actors and stuff like that versus his theories on communists actually within the State Department and taking over vital roles in the government and stuff like that, because the government stuff is, everybody was on board with him when he was attacking Hollywood. It was when he started attacking Alger Hiss and stuff like that in the State Department that people were like, dude, you're crazy. These are government officials. And those are the ones he was most right on.
Yeah, well, there's nothing wrong with him being right, but I think a lot of the tactics and the execution of the ideas went greatly overboard.
Agreed. The social ramifications for people outside of government were unacceptable.
Yeah.
You're allowed to be a communist.
Exactly. That's a very good point. It's like the idea that you would call somebody out who's pretending not to be, that's fine. I have no problems with that. But also, if somebody is Joe Blow working at McDonald's and he's a communist, I'm pretty sure that's allowed under our system of government.
Agreed. Yeah,
Mhm.
I more reference the stuff that he was made to look a fool over, which was his attacks on actual government members,
Mhm.
because time has revealed that he was pretty spot on, particularly in regards to the State Department being just absolutely overrun with communist agents
Which they still
in that
are.
time frame. Yeah, exactly.
So that's
I,
not really.
I I have a theory that the reason we see the left go so off the rails
Yeah.
in modern society is because they're the tail of the snake and the head's been cut off.
Hmm.
They used to operate, all of these systems used to operate, via the KGB out of Moscow. They all took their orders from Moscow. Well, when the Soviet Union fell in 89 and it just all fell apart, you still had the true believers in the West
Oh yeah,
with
yeah,
no direction.
yeah. They didn't go
They
anywhere. That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and that's where you see people like Alinsky and stuff like that. This is kind of the
Hmm.
start of it. And this is what they turn
Hmm.
to develop that Western socialism,
Yeah. Yeah.
democratic socialism, or
It's a better
whatever,
form of socialism, is I think the way they see
which
it.
means it's still shit.
Oh, of course, but I've talked about this. Is that, in my opinion, and I I would have to do a lot more research to really push it out there as more than just opinion, as fact. But my opinion is very much just anecdotally that when the Soviet Union broke up, communism took an awful lot of the blame for both the fall of the Soviet Union and for the brutality of the Soviet Union. And people that were in the former Soviet Union, not just Russians, but all the other republics as well, uh, they they had a very understandable natural dislike towards communism. Now, what Americans don't seem to understand is that a dislike to communism can happen, especially when people have experienced it firsthand. But a patriotism towards their homeland does not go away, even if the political
Correct.
system changes. Because
Correct.
a lot of people in the US equate the two. It's like, well, if they're patriotic, they're commies. No, they're not commies. We have more fucking commies here in the US now than they
All
did
right.
in
Well,
Russia.
yeah. All right. Here's where I get branded a Putin simp.
Yeah, right.
That's what you have with Putin in Russia right now. Everybody's like, oh,
Hmm.
he's a former KGB agent. Oh, he's a communist. Oh, he's this.
Hmm.
Yes, he worked for the KGB.
Yep.
Putin is not a communist.
No.
Putin is not. He's an authoritarian. I'll give you
Not.
that.
I don't think any more than any other president that's been in power for 25 years is. I mean,
Correct. Correct.
you can't not be at some point.
Yeah, we can't hold the world to America's standard with every 4 years having
Every
these
American
elections.
president has exhibited traits of wanting that. They just have been kicked out of office before they could
Right.
accomplish it.
Right. And there's an argument to be had that our turnover rate causes a stalemate in the system
Mhm.
that makes things take longer to get accomplished, which
Which is good.
I would argue is a feature, not a bug.
Absolutely, it's a feature. And my
They
solution to everything that's wrong with government is shorter term limits.
right.
So impose term limits where none exist, and I would include, and this is because we talked about like the State Department being full of communists. It's natural, it's to be expected, because people that work for the government in any country, doesn't matter what the country is,
They want bigger
they
government.
have tendencies towards socialism because they're working for somebody that literally changes laws. Like they're working for the king. They are
Right.
the bureaucrats in support of the king. And so what do they want? They want more power for that king, because that's more power for them. And they
Exactly.
want to have nobody standing out. This is the other thing about when you're a one of millions of people who are employed by the U.S. government. You don't want to stand out. Fauci's learning that lesson real fast. You do not want to stand out. What you want to do is collect a paycheck, get regular raises, get a great pension, have better insurance than everybody else, have all these perks, but you do not want to stand out from the next guy, because when Congress or somebody else comes a calling and wants to blame something on somebody, you want to be the guy that's next to the wall, that's the same color as the wall, that nobody notices.
Yeah.
And so this is a natural place for people that have that type of an interest and predisposition for work, versus entrepreneurial people that want to take risks, they want to stand out, they want to make a lot of money, would never in a million years work for the government. So my solution is the same. Term limits. You cannot work in the State Department for more than 10 years of your life.
Starting with the bureaucracy.
Yeah,
I think,
for everybody.
I think term limits for the bureaucratic positions in Washington is more important than term limits for, senators or
I don't know.
House
we don't have
members.
enough turnover for the House and Senate. I would.
I agree. I agree that we don't have enough, but I think it would be more impactful. To institute it on the bureaucratic state.
None of these were meant to be jobs. They were meant to be service to the state. That's what it's supposed to be.
Correct. There's
not
one
a career.
position.
It's not a fucking career.
There's one position in the government that was meant to be a career for life, and that's Supreme Court justice.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly right.
And that is directly counter to why everything else is not meant to be that. A Supreme Court justice is supposed to be for life as a career, because that's how you make sure they're not corrupted by the political
They can't be influenced through political means that way. The Supreme Court is essentially the board of directors of the United States. They are the people that the president's the CEO, the treasurer is the CFO. All these jobs can be mapped to corporate terminology. The Supreme Court is the board of directors. They're the ones that ultimately say, hey, we read the charter of the company when we first started it, and it says here that you're not supposed to do this, and you're doing it. So no. And their word is final. Nobody gets to overrule them. Now, the company...
James O'Keefe found that out very recently.
He sure did. And and so a friend of mine is Adam Curry, who I don't know if you know who Adam is.
Yep. The godfather of podcasting.
Exactly. Well, the podfather.
Yeah, the podfather.
He one of the listeners to No Agenda, one of the people that sent him money, donator, was one of the people on the board of directors of Project Veritas. And so he's been sending sort of the other side's info to Adam, and essentially saying, look, this is not the way that James is representing it. There's a lot more to it than this. Nobody told him that he was fired. We said we wanted certain conditions from him, and he chose to leave as a result of that. So there's a lot of arguments going on.
He said that they never fired him.
Well,
in his video on President's Day, where he came into the office when no one else was there, he said very clearly,
told him not to show up.
He said, I don't have a position on the board anymore.
Yeah, they did do that.
They said, I don't have any power or authority, and I don't have any creative control. So I don't really know what my position here is, and I'm not okay with that. So I'm going to go do my thing.
Although we know what they would have preferred his position to be, just purely a fundraiser.
Exactly.
That's all they wanted.
Of course they would have, but that's not him. No. They should have known that wasn't him.
Yeah.
And he, being the media / social media heavyweight that he is, played that perfectly.
Well, the one other thing that guy who's on the board that, in fact, I think he's the chairman of the board, that sent notes to Adam said is that vote to remove him from the positions he was in was a 3-4 vote or a 4-3 vote. So
it was close.
A very close vote. It was literally one vote away from nothing being changed.
Right.
But it just so happened that there were 4 people that wanted to have that change. 3 of them, including this guy, voted against it. But they were, it's a board. So it's majority rules.
Yeah, you only need that one extra vote.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
But no,
again, I
he
kind of blame James because ultimately, with this being his business, even though it's nonprofit that he started, he totally had control of who's on the board, and he put the wrong people in.
correct, and he has seemed to take responsibility for that. In his recent appearances since he launched O'Keefe Media Group, which OMG, that's great branding right
It is
there.
a good brand. I like it. Yeah.
So
And he's taking in the money.
and he's doing it before the board is able to go public with whatever their side of the story is, because they still have to keep it all close to the vest, based just how
well.
That's
and
how
this is the other thing that he fixed, which again I was shaking my head for a long time, even before this incident. Is like, why the hell are they a nonprofit? They have no business being a nonprofit. There's so many more regulations that deal specifically with nonprofits than for profits. They should have been a for-profit organization from the get-go.
Yes, but I think being a nonprofit, particularly in the early days where a ton of the funding wasn't there, one, it incentivized wealthy people to throw money at the project because it was tax deductible.
Yeah, that's probably fair enough, but they should have done a better job of managing that.
It affords you a certain level of protection from direct action by the government by being technically a charity organization, a nonprofit organization. The government, there's a lot of regulations. You got to make sure all your T's are crossed and your I's are dotted and stuff like that. But as far as what the government can do to restrict your operations or your growth or whatever, it's tough for them to go after charities. It really is. That's why the left uses charities so much. Like, we'll shout out Acorn right here. James O'Keefe's, break onto the scene. That's why they use the nonprofits the way they do, because even when the opposition is in power, their hands are kind of tied.
I don't think they're tied at all. I think it's just sort of a decency factor that exists where, well, it could be a decency part of, like, nobody wants to blow back from a news story that says you went after a nonprofit.
Right. So it might not be a physical tie.
Yeah.
But it's a sociological tie.
Yeah.
Like, society is not going to accept that.
There's nothing that would prevent the government from going after that. In fact, they've certainly done it with the NRA.
Correct.
With the nonprofit portion, the NRA has multiple portions as well.
Obama's IRS going after the Tea Party nonprofits.
Yep.
And
exactly.
So it's there, but it causes blowback if you do it.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of insurance. So I think that's why he started it that way. And then I'm not knowledgeable enough to know how hard it is to transition a nonprofit to a for-profit. I know it is possible. ChatGPT has done it.
Who has? Oh, ChatGPT.
ChatGPT.
Usually they just spool up another company and then just sell off the assets, because that's.
Well, I know Elon's been calling, or OpenAI technically is, I guess, the company. I know Elon's been calling them out recently because he was like, I don't know how I donated $100,000 or whatever crazy amount of money he donated to their project. As a nonprofit. He's like, how is it that I made that donation and then they just trade over to a publicly traded company with my money?
Yeah.
It's definitely a shady way to raise seed money. So,
well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of shady ways to raise seed. Okay, we're never going to finish if we don't keep going.
Correct. We got, I think, like 3 more pages.
To bring on this Reformation, read Prologue. XX requires that the organizer work inside the system, among not only the middle class but the 40% of American families, more than 70 million people, whose incomes range from $5,000 to $10,000 a year.
Okay, so if we scale it up to current terms, it's about a 4x. Actually, it's probably more like 5x.
Because
it's about 4x from the 1980s. From the 70s, it'd be about 5x.
And he's talking minimum wage workers.
So
is what he's-
55,000 to 100,000 probably.
No, 5x, that would be 25,000 to 50,000.
Or there you go. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, he's talking
Yeah,
minimum wage.
25 to 50.
Minimum wage workers is who
Mhm.
he's talking here.
Well, and you know, in some states, minimum wage is $20 an hour. You know.
Well, very few. Most of them, it's no more than 15, and I think $15 an hour. I think is like 30 something
Well,
dollars.
I know.
grand a
Last
year.
time I was in Washington State, the McDonald's there was paying over $20 an hour.
Washington, Oregon, and California don't count.
Okay.
They cannot be dismissed by labeling them blue collar or hard hat. They will not continue to be relatively passive and slightly challenging. If we fail to communicate with them, if we don't encourage them to form alliances with us, they will move to the right. Maybe they will anyway, but let's not let it happen by default. Our youth are impatient with the preliminaries that are essential to purposeful action. Effective organization is thwarted by the desire for instant and dramatic change, or as I have phrased it elsewhere, the demand for revelation rather than revolution. It's the kind of thing we see in playwriting. The first act introduces the characters and the plot. In the second act, the plot and characters are developed as the play strives to hold the audience's attention. In the final act, good and evil have their dramatic confrontation and resolution. The present generation wants to go right into the third act, skipping the first two, in which case there is no play, nothing but confrontation for confrontations's sake, a flare-up and back to darkness. To build a powerful organization takes time. It is tedious, but that's the way the game is played. If you want to play and not just yell, kill the umpire. What is the alternative to working?
So that right there is crucial, and that's where what he's describing is what the LGBT community did to get gay marriage approved, and what he's condemning there is what the T section of that community is doing nowadays with the gender theory and the drag queen story hours. They're being too impatient. They're pushing for too quick of results, and it's causing that flare up that he's talking about right there.
Yeah.
They're, you know,
I would agree. I mean, another 20 years of just sort of casual trans stuff, and they probably could do all that without too much objection.
Well, yeah, I mean, you look at, people like Blair White is a trans woman on the right who is very much accepted, very much. I mean, obviously, certain aspects of the right still push back against her, but
as we saw recently with the flare up,
yeah,
and I like Blair.
That was an expert. I like Blair. I've always, again, I'm old school Gamergate. I grew up or came up in the internet culture watching Sargon, Bering, Blair, Andy Worski, Chris Ray Gun, Shoe on Head. Like, these are the Armored Skeptic.
Yeah, socialists like Shoe on Head.
Well, she took a crazy turn after her and Armored Skeptic broke up.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, these are the people, Thunderfoot, these are the people I was introduced to internet culture on. And, I don't know. It's different now. Like the world is just different now. We don't have creators like that anymore.
Oh, sure. You say that because you're an old man now. The kids, they have their own creators that you've never heard of that will be remembered fondly by them in 15 years.
True.
It's perpetual, dude. Nothing really changes from a.
Well, and that's what we're seeing here. He's able to tap into that cycle.
Let me phrase that better. The lens does not change. What changes is what you see through it.
Correct.
So,
correct.
Now the other interesting part of this that comes out when he starts talking about blue collar, working class, is this document this book that he wrote is not written for poor people. The people that he talked about from Appalachia or any of the nations like Vietnam. This book
Right.
is written for middle class, college educated adults who are coming into their own and don't like their parents.
Right.
So this is a manual for, I don't want to say, but certainly middle class people. This is a manual for middle class kids in college who want to change the world for the better, not because they need it to be better, but because they see other people who don't have it as good as they did, and they don't understand why.
Yep.
That's who this is written for.
Yep. Agreed.
Inside asterisk asterisk the system? A mess of rhetorical garbage about. Bum the system down. Yippee yells of, do it, or do your thing. What else? Bombs? Sniping? Silence when police are killed and screams of, murdering fascist pigs. When others are killed. Attacking and baiting the police? Public suicide? Power comes out of the barrel of a gun. Is an absurd rallying cry RTI prologue when the other side has had the guns. Lenin was a pragmatist. When he returned to what was then Petrograd from exile, he said that the Bolsheviks stood for getting power through the ballot but would reconsider after they got the guns. Militant mouthings? Spouting quotes from Mao, Castro, and Che Guevara, which are as germane to our highly technological, computerized, cybernetic, nuclear-powered, mass media society as a stagecoach on a jet runway at Kennedy Airport.
So that was really good too. So
It is.
he's saying don't act like people that are going to be disconnected from everybody else. Don't just repeat what Che Guevara says, because the people you're talking to are not the people that Che Guevara was talking to.
Right.
Same thing with Castro and Mao.
Yep.
And so consequently, you have to adapt and learn to use the language of the people that you're around.
Right. Yep. And
Airport?
go ahead.
Okay.
Airport? Let us in the name of radical pragmatism not forget that in our system with all its repressions we can still speak out and denounce the administration, attack its policies, work to build an opposition political base. True, there is...
Okay, I'm going to pause it because this sentence literally can be used by the right without modification. Let us in the name of radical pragmatism not forget that in our system with all its repressions, we can still speak out and denounce the administration, attacks on its policies, work to build an opposition political base. Like, totally goes for either side.
There's a low-key appreciation for what America is supposed to be in his writing.
Mm-hmm.
It's just where he wants to see it go that I disagree with.
Right. And in the rest of this paragraph, he actually talks about how great America is.
Mm-hmm.
There is government harassment, but there still is that relative freedom to fight. I can attack my government, try to organize to change it. That's more than I can do in Moscow, Peking, or Havana. Remember the reaction of the Red Guard to the Cultural Revolution and the fate of the Chinese college students. Just a few of the violent episodes of bombings or a courtroom shootout that we have experienced here would have resulted in a sweeping purge and mass executions in Russia, China, or Cuba. Let's keep some perspective. We will start with the system because there is no other place to start from except political lunacy. It is most important for those of us who want revolutionary change to understand that revolution must be preceded by reformation. To assume that a political revolution can survive without the supporting base of a popular reformation is to ask for the impossible in politics. Men don't like to step abruptly out of the security of familiar experience. They need a bridge to cross from their own experience to a new way.
So again, great paragraph here, a couple paragraphs actually.
Yep.
Equally as applicable to either side in the political argument. And it's the idea that what we want to do is take over, not burn the whole damn place down.
Exactly. And I think the reason, this is where I like Trump getting in 2016. Him getting elected in 2016 threw them off of this course.
It did.
It caused them to go into this tailspin where they're overplaying their hand.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we're able to kind of claw some of this ground back from them. Had Hillary made it in, and they would have been able to continue with that slow creep through the institutions.
Yeah.
We were fucked. I mean, I think we were just fucked.
Well, we're
I think
living right now through what we would have lived through 4 years earlier.
with a whole lot more awakened, red-pilled, whatever you want to call it, people to call out the bullshit because of what happened with Trump, because they pushed back against the Trump system too much.
Mm-hmm.
They woke the middle up. Enough of the middle saw the riots, the protests, the changing of election rules, those things that they added to their opposition's forces.
Mm-hmm. All right, let's go on here.
Yeah.
Wait. A revolutionary organizer Prologue 22 must shake up the prevailing patterns of their lives, agitate, create disenchantment and discontent with the current values, to produce, if not a passion for change, at least a passive, affirmative, non-challenging climate. The revolution was effected before the war, calm men said. John Adams wrote. The revolution was in the hearts and minds of the people. This radical change in the principles, opinions, sentiments, and affections of the people was the real American Revolution. A revolution without a prior reformation would collapse or become a totalitarian tyranny. A reformation means that masses of our people have reached the point of disillusionment with past ways and values. They don't know what will work, but they do know that the prevailing system is self-defeating, frustrating, and hopeless.
So this is kind of what we're seeing in France right now.
Yeah.
It's not quite a revolution, but man, if a revolution were to spark, it would not take long for it to take the whole country.
Well, that's because the people are behind it. They got the people behind it first. If you go back 5 years to the Yellow Vest protests,
right?
They didn't have the people behind them, and Macron was able to kind of put his foot on their throat and mash them down eventually. Now, they were pretty successful then too, but eventually he was able to get them under control. I'm not sure he's going to be able to rein this in, what's going on over there. And the funny
not
part
without giving them everything they want.
Yeah. And the funny part about that is you're not seeing anything about it.
Yeah.
On mainstream American
Oh no,
media.
they're ignoring it. They're totally ignoring it. There's literally
they have to.
Buildings burning in Paris.
Yeah, they have to, because if they show it,
then
enough people in this country are going to go, wait. They're doing that, and they're affecting change.
Yeah.
They, it's like the whole bank thing where they're like, oh, don't talk about it on social media because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Same thing with those type of protests. You put them out there. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It gives other people more ideas.
I don't want to say something that'll get your channel banned already this fast, but when you look at the J6 stuff that happened, the biggest problem with that is people they didn't know what to do, and they had no goal, no mission, and so they stopped immediately. And the result of that was a chance for the politicians to regroup and figure out, oh, okay, well, we can manage this. We know what to do. Because in other countries, when you've had similar events happen, and you can use a number of countries in South America, you can use, in fact, you can even use Ukraine, and with the start of the Maidan. The government didn't immediately run away. They started pushing back. They started using, police tactics and military tactics against the protesters. But when a few large government buildings end up getting set on fire, the self-preservation of the government kicks in. And now they're more concerned about them and their families than they are about the country. And so all of them are doing deals. They all quickly fell over to the new regime. And this is really irrelevant to the fact that the U.S. made it happen. But I'm using this just as an example of a typical scenario for revolution.
Well, also, all of that is correct if the purpose of J6 had been revolution.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you.
As someone who, and I said
here's the hard
I said
part
it on another stream, so I'll go ahead and say it now.
Yeah.
As someone who was present in DC on that day, it was never that. It was never that.
Right.
We were told, and it was a scheduled, permitted event that was supposed to happen, that bad actors caused some issues before the crowd ever got there.
Is that you have an event that was not supposed to be a revolution start what appears to be a revolution. And this is where you can't have it happen. This is where I think that if you can't trust all the people that are coming to the event, since you don't know them, and you shouldn't be able to.
Right.
The best thing you can do is not go anywhere near buildings that you don't have a permit to be at.
Right.
And that was the problem.
No, there was a permitted gathering at the Capitol that day.
So they had permits to be there, just not go in.
Correct.
Yeah. Well,
correct. And as someone who's from the Mid-Atlantic, who's very familiar with Washington D.C., been there multiple times, the grounds that they had barricaded off before the crowds got there are normally open to the public. By the time 45 had stopped speaking and the mass of people made it to the Capitol grounds, every indication of a barrier that said don't go here was already gone. And as you got there, it looked like any other day in DC where you could walk onto the Capitol grounds. Now the idiots who caused violence and attacked police officers, the idiots who broke windows and stole furniture out of the building and all this stuff, dragged the cop out into the crowd. Those idiots are just that. They're idiots and they belong in jail. But I'll eventually get it up on my channel, but I have hours of video from that day.
Well, showing, put it up, man. That's exactly the kind of shit that people want to see.
Hey, yeah, it's. But I gotta download it off my old personal channel where it's all privated right now because
do that.
Strikes
that could disappear too. But I think it's important distinction that you make, which is what was the actual goal? Because I can say that this was an arrested revolution. This was like what could have certainly turned into a revolution if we look at the patterns for what happens in other countries that have had revolutions in the United States. And I think, frankly, that there was sufficient support that it could have very well been a successful revolution. Not guaranteed, but it could have turned out to be a successful revolution. But
for the sake of my channel, I'm going to disavow any talks of revolution.
No, we're talking about
Minecraft. In
Minecraft, exactly. Now we're talking about the historical revolutions that are happening in this book that we're reviewing. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
And in fact, this book even condemns the revolutions.
It does, and it's funny.
Yeah.
Like the part we just read, and I know it's been a while since we went over it, but it's really funny. Like I said, you can see the divergence of the modern left in the last 8 years. From these tactics and the effect it's had on the ignorant middle of American politics. The people who just go through their life every day, go to job, go to work, punch the clock, come home, eat some hamburger helper with the kids, watch CNN at night, and then turn on American Idol and do the next thing, do the same thing the next day. Those people were woken up by the shock to the system and the pushback that the left had to the Trump presidency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. All right, the next paragraph's actually really good too.
Yep.
Hopeless. They won't act for change, but won't strongly oppose those who do. The time is then ripe for revolution. Those who, for whatever combination of reasons, encourage the opposite of reformation, become the unwitting allies of the far political right. Parts of the far left have gone so far in the political circle that they are now all but indistinguishable from the extreme right. It reminds me of the days when Hitler, new on the scene, was excused for his actions by humanitarians on the grounds of a paternal rejection and childhood trauma. When there are people who espouse the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy, or the Tate murders, or the Marin County Courthouse kidnapping and killings, or the University of Wisconsin bomb ing and killing as revolutionary acts, then we are dealing with people who are merely hiding psychosis behind a political mask. The masses of people recoil with horror and say, our way is bad and we were willing to let it change, but certainly not for this murderous madness. No.
Yeah, so that a complete repudiation of violence for the sake of violence and retribution
of the summer of love.
Yeah.
Like, that's basically him saying, don't do this.
Yeah, this will not work.
And if it wasn't for the pandemic, that summer would have been the reason Trump rolled into a second term.
Mm-hmm.
But the pandemic threw all of that into a tailspin.
Yeah, which Trump certainly takes some blame for as well.
Absolutely.
No
Absolutely.
matter. Prologue 23, how bad things are now, they are better than that. So they begin to turn back. They regress into acceptance of a calm ing massive repression in the name of law and order. In the midst of the gassing and violence by the Chicago Police and National Guard during the 1968 Democratic Convention, many students asked me, do you still believe we should try to work inside our system? These were students who had been with Eugene McCarthy in New Hampshire and followed him across the country. Some had been with Robert Kennedy when he was killed in Los Angeles. Many of the tears that were shed in Chicago were not from gas. Mr. Alinsky, we fought in primary after primary, and the people voted no on Vietnam. Look at that convention. They're not paying any attention to the vote. Look at your police and the army. You still want us to work in the system? It hurt me to see the American army with drawn bayonets advancing on American boys and girls. But the answer I gave the young radicals seemed to me the only realistic one. Do one of three things. 1. Go find a whale ing wall and feel sorry for yourselves. 2. Go psycho and start bombing, but this will only swing people to the right. 3. Learn a lesson. Go home, organize, build power, and at the next convention, you be the delegates. Remember, once you organize people around something as commonly agreed upon as pollution, then an organized people is on the move. From there, it's a short and natural step to political pollution, to Pentagon pollution. It is not enough just to elect your candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And that's key right there. That's exactly what these students did. That's where Barack Obama, that's where Hillary Clinton went out and filled the mold of the Democrat of their day. It's why they were friends with people like Robert Byrd in the KKK and stuff like that. It was pragmatic friendship.
Absolutely.
It was to get ingratiated within the system so that they could change it from within.
Black Lives Matter and the KKK have more in common than the normal person does with the KKK.
Absolutely.
They both want to have isolationist communities. They both see a separation as a good thing. I mean, they may dislike each other, but they have a lot in common.
Yep. Agreed.
Mm-hmm.
So let's press on here. I think we got like
you want to skip anything or go through the whole thing?
How much do we got left?
Couple pages, maybe a little more.
Couple pages. Let's just push through and let it kind of roll.
You must keep the pressure on. Radicals should keep in mind Franklin D. Roosevelt's response to a reform delegation. Okay, you've convinced me. Now go on out and bring pressure on Met. Action comes from keeping the heat on.
Yeah,
Prologue
I've sped it up a little
XXD,
bit.
no politician can sit on a hot issue if you make it hot enough. As for Vietnam, I would like to see our nation be the first in the history of man to publicly say, "We were wrong. What we did was horrible. We got in and kept getting in deeper and deeper, and at every step we invented new reasons for staying."
Can I just substitute Vietnam for Ukraine?
Or Afghanistan, or Iraq, or
Mhm.
any conflict in the last 40 years.
Yep.
Staying. We have paid part of the price in 44,000 dead Americans. There is nothing we can ever do to make it up to the people of Indochina, or to our own people, but we will try. We believe that our world has come of age so that it is no longer a sign of weakness or defeat to abandon a childish pride and vanity, to admit we were wrong. Such an admission would shake up the foreign policy concepts of all nations and open the door to a new international order. This is our alternative to Vietnam. Anything else is the old makeshift patchwork. If this were to happen, Vietnam may even have been somewhat worth it. A final word on our system. The democratic ideal springs from the ideas of liberty, equality, majority rule through free elections, protection of the rights of minority ties, and freedom to subscribe to multiple loyalties in matters of religion, economics, and politics rather than to a total loyalty to the state.
Now, that doesn't sound bad at all, does it?
No,
Kind of sounds what the left used to stand for way back when.
exactly.
Mm-hmm. Democratic ideal springs from the ideas of liberty, equality, majority rule through free elections, protection of the rights of the minorities, and freedom to subscribe to multiple loyalties in matters of religion, economics, and politics, rather than to a single loyalty of the state. I mean, that actually sounds kind of far right.
Yeah. Yeah, and he even goes into a little bit ago how like the right and the left have progressed so far that they're coming back together.
Mhm.
And what he's describing there is horseshoe theory, which I don't think had even been coined at this point in time.
Yeah.
I think that was later in the 70s that got coined. But you know, that's what he's talking about. And it's true. If you look at people like Richard Spencer or something like that on the left, or on the right rather, they have more in common with, like you were saying, with the KKK.
Mhm.
They have more in common with BLM as far as their solutions to the problems that the country is facing.
Yeah.
The only difference is who they pick as the winner.
Dude, the KKK does not like cops any more than BLM does.
Exactly. Exactly.
Uh-huh.
State. The spirit of democracy is the idea of importance and worth in the individual, and faith in the kind of world where the individual can achieve as much of his potential as
That is
possible.
totally conservative.
Great dangers always accompany great opportunities. The
Yeah.
possibility of destruction is always implicit in the act of creation. Thus, the greatest enemy of individual freedom is the individual himself. From the beginning, the weakness, as well as the strength of the democratic ideal, has been the people. Prologue 25 people cannot be free unless they are willing to sacrifice some of their interests to guarantee the freedom of others. The price of democracy is the ongoing pursuit of the common good by all of the people. 135 years ago, Tocqueville * gravely warned that unless individual citizens were regularly involved in the action of governing themselves, self-government would pass from the scene. Citizen participation is the animating spirit and force in a society predicated on voluntarism. We
That
are not
right there.
concerned with people who profess.
That right there
Mhm.
again is basic right-wing talking points at this point
Yep.
in time. Get out,
Totally.
get involved, get on your school boards, get on your
Mhm.
city councils. You know, that's what he's saying. And he's, the thing about it is he's right. That's how the left has won for the last 50 years.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Is they did these things. So the right does have to do these things. You know, that's part of the reason I wanted to cover this book, because as informative as it is as to seeing what the left has done and kind of maybe where they're going, it's also informative to those of us on the right who want to fight against this stuff, because, you know, as we've covered a couple times, they're starting to break away from this playbook.
Mhm.
So if we can pick it up, and use it
Oh yeah, yeah,
right
yeah.
to benefit the right-wing ideology, then we can gain back some of that ground that we've lost.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. And then, I mean, a lot of this, like, the spirit of democracy is the idea of importance and worth in the individual, and the faith in the kind of world where the individual can achieve as much of his potential as possible. I mean, he'd be labeled a far right Nazi at this point
Oh, for sure.
for
For
saying
sure.
that kind of thing. In fact, I should do that. I should freaking just start pulling quotes from this book and then posting them, and then having liberals like reply very negatively, and then
Yep.
reply back with who the quote is from.
Well, and that's why I wanted to do this, man. I think it's really important to break this book down
Mm-hmm.
and really look at what he said, because there is useful information to be gleaned for the right.
Hey, by the way, why is your
Um,
background like a TV screen?
It's not.
Is that on
It's a
purpose?
door. Where?
No,
Over
like the
here?
background of the, not behind you, the whole
Oh,
channel.
yeah, this is a warning. That's the old nuke warning
Oh, here,
screen that used
remove
to.
the main window for a sec.
I don't know how
The
to
shared
do it.
screen.
I don't know how to do it.
I just, well, you just click on it. Click on the present to stop presenting. There you go. No, let's still present it. Now I can't see you, but I can still see the other window. God damn it.
Yeah, it's there's no way to actually see the
Okay.
middle.
Well,
There you
okay.
go. But see, it's got the radiation
the
symbol
given
in the
Got it.
middle.
but yearn for the dark security of dependency, where they can be spared the burden of the cis ions. Reluctant to grow up, or incapable of doing so, they want to remain children and be cared for by others. Those who can should be encouraged to grow. For the others, the fault lies not in the system but in themselves. Here we are desperately concerned with the vast mass of our people who, thwarted through lack of interest or opportunity, or both, do not participate in the endless re. It must not be forgotten that it is especially dangerous to enslave men in the minor details of life. For my own part, I should be inclined to think freedom less necessary in great things than in little ones, if it were possible to be secure of the one without possessing the other. Subjection in minor affairs breaks out every day, and is felt by the whole community indiscriminately. It doth asterisk not drive men to resistance, but it crosses them at every turn, till they are led to surrender the exercise of their will. Thus their spirit is gradually broken and their character enervated, whereas that obedience, which is exacted on a few important but rare occasions, only exhibits servitude at certain intervals, and throws the burden of it upon a small number of men. It is vain to
What
summon a people.
happened?
So what it's reading, you don't have in your version.
Is
This
it
is
the
actually
footnote down here
it's a quote. Yeah, it's the quote from Taco Bell.
from Taco Bell?
Yep.
Okay.
People
Okay.
who have been rendered so dependent on the central power to choose from time to time the representatives of that power. This rare and brief exercise of their free choice, however important it may be, will not prevent them from gradually losing the faculties of thinking, feeling, and acting for themselves, and thus gradually falling below the level of humanity. 1 asterisk, Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America Prologues of Responsibilities of
And now it picks back up to where it was.
responsibilities of citizenship, and are resigned to lives determined by others. To
It's the
lose
last
your
page.
identity as a citizen of democracy is but a step from losing your identity as a person. People react to this frustration by not acting at all. The separation of the people from the routine daily functions of citizenship is heartbreak in a democracy. It is a grave situation when a people resign their citizenship, or when a resident of a great city, though he may desire to
God damn it! Come on.
desire to take a hand, lacks the means to participate. That citizen sinks further into apathy, anonymity, and depersonalization. The result is that he comes to depend on public authority, and a state of civic sclerosis sets in. From time to time, there have been external enemies at our gates. There has always been the enemy within, the hidden and malignant inertia that foreshadows more certain destruction to our life and future than any nuclear warhead. There can be no darker or more deviating tragedy than the death of man's faith in himself and in his power to direct his future. I salute the present generation. Hang on to one of your most precious parts of youth, laughter. Don't lose it as many of you seem to have done. You need it. Together we may find some of what we're looking for: laughter, beauty, love, and the chance to create. Saul Alinsky rules for radicals the purpose.
There you go. So
All
that's
right.
the
Well, there you go. That's the prologue.
prologue. Yeah.
I think it's funny in these last couple paragraphs here.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost, in line with the horseshoe theory. It's almost as if his playbook is ready to be adopted by the right instead of the left, where he talks about fighting against the inevitable inertia of time and everything else. The left has been so dominant for so long that they are the inertia in our political force now.
Yeah.
That is the force.
Well,
that is
and
moving
to be
forward.
fair, this playbook that he wrote was not against the right. It was against the establishment, which included the left.
Correct.
Because by 1971, the U.S. House of Representatives had been in Democrat control for already 30 years.
Right.
It would be another decade before it went to Republican control.
Exactly.
So
2 decades almost. It would be until Newt Gingrich, right?
It was in the 80s. It wasn't.
Oh no, they did get control under Reagan too.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. The right. So the Democrats seem to get like 10 to 16 years in power at a time.
Mm-hmm.
And then America gets tired of it and they elect in the right.
Yeah.
And then they get 4 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And then they're too mean. So the left wins again.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the old Paula Abdul song, like 2 steps forwards and 3 steps back. For the right, that's what we're fighting up against here. So, but yeah, so there you go. That's the prologue for Rules of Radicals by Saul Alinsky. Line
in
for
case
line,
you didn't read it in college.
There you go. Or didn't go to college.
Yep.
There's a lot of, I didn't graduate high
you
school.
weren't meant to read this if you didn't go to college,
Right. Exactly. So, that's that. I was pretty close. I expected about 2 hours per stream. I think after we end this, I'm gonna have you stick around for a little bit and talk about that reader you used, because mine wasn't working. So for future ones. But other than that, final thoughts. Go ahead.
No, I think it's a good idea. I like what you're doing. I mean, honestly, so my co-host on one of my podcasts on Just Two Good Old Boys, where we talk about the war in Northern Aggression, on that podcast, my co-host is a voracious reader. He reads like a book a week.
Hold on, can I interrupt you for a second?
Yeah.
As someone who grew up in the 90s going to school in Richmond, Virginia, and getting off for Lee Jackson King Day, I love the reference to the War of Northern Aggression.
Well, what else would you call it? I mean, obviously. So
exactly. Lincoln was the most tyrannical president in American history.
Absolutely. I mean, we won't even say what he was close to, but but on that podcast, he reads a ton, and he's always giving us, me included, but also listeners, books to read that are really good. And I always just add them to my list of titles that I buy that are queued up on my Kindle or my Audible account. I think I'm behind 186 books right now. So it takes a while. So I'm actually kind of glad that by turning this into a video series, you're in a sense forcing me to reread this book, which has been many, many years since I originally read it. And while I remember the general terms of the book and the vagueness, I don't remember a lot of these specifics that sound extremely conservative sounding at this point.
Yeah. The big thing that today's left has lost from his take on things is the value of what America is.
Right.
And And that's the big difference from this book. He still values America as an idea, as a nation, and as a symbol to the rest of the world. You know, the shining city on the hill. And today's modern
doesn't like
left
the
has lost that.
corporatism. He doesn't like the corporatism that came in and took
Me
over.
too.
And that's the irony, right? Is because the modern left worships corporatism. They think
Right.
all these companies are in a better position to police the world than even the government.
Right.
They have no interest in individualism the way that he talks about it here. And in general, I think that were he alive today magically for like a week, not that he was still alive from back then, because I'm sure his mind changed as time went on as well, but if he just magically popped out of his grave and was alive for a week, I think he would be quite surprised at what the dominant left political goals are. And then he would probably see that while there's still plenty of disagreements with the right, he would see the populism group as actually being closer.
I think he'd have been wearing a "Keep America Great Again" shirt in 2020.
Maybe. But
just a joke there, but
but
I see what you're saying.
I don't think he would. I don't think he would be eagerly on the side of AOC.
Correct. I think he'd look at,
and I guarantee you he would be looking at
Barack.
looking at the Ukraine war right now and going, had America learned nothing?
Exactly. And like I was saying, I think he'd look at Hillary and particularly Barack and be like, what did you guys do?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I laid this out for you. You used it as a step-by-step guide to get to the pinnacles of power, and then you just threw it out the window.
Yep.
So
they know better now. They know better.
Exactly. So, well, hey, Gene, thank you so much for joining me, man. This was despite the name, this was indeed a test for how these future chapters are going to go. Everybody stay tuned. I'm not ready to make any announcements yet, but I have hopefully some big announcements coming for future guests going over this book. And yeah, I think it's crucial. I think we need to really dig into this, and I think it's great for people on the right to actually start seeing where, the left gets a lot of their ideas from. So, on that note, Gene, if you want to shout out your socials one more time.
Yep. In fact, I was just putting them in there for you as well.
There you go.
So on Twitter, it's Sir Gene TX for Texas. And then the two podcasts, the one I just mentioned is just one long ass word, just twogoodoldboys.com. And then the other one that I mentioned earlier is Sir Gene Speaks, which is my sort of long format interview, kind of like a Joe Rogan type podcast.
That's the one you had Farron on the other day, right?
Yep. She was on that as well. Yep. And that's at podcast.sirgene.com. Most of what I do is actually podcasts. I've got a few other podcasts that I do. I'm not even mentioning because I don't want to confuse people. But most stuff I do on podcasts, I'm slowly starting to record the podcast with cameras on. And for the guests who don't mind having a camera on, and some of them do, but for the ones that don't mind that, I also put those out on YouTube.
Okay.
And that's at the YouTube channel is just Sir Gene TX, just like the
that and your Twitter are both in the description right now. And like I said, I'll get these other two links into the description before the whole video goes up.
Well, I'm glad you're finally moving forward with this. This is cool stuff.
Yeah, man. Thank you for joining me. It was a lot of fun. We drug on a little bit there, but our conversations are always, they're always higher level. So I always appreciate them. Great friend, great mind. Check out Sir Gene. And then you guys catch me on Twitter at Grifty IRL. Check, you're here at my YouTube. Check out my Rumble, and I do have a locals page at grifty.locals.com. It's free right now. There's no subscription cost. But get signed up, because that's where all my announcements come out first. And as we move forward, there's going to be a lot of exclusive content going directly to the locals page. So again, that's www. I am on Rumble at Grifty as well. So pretty much any platform. I think I even have a Facebook page out there. I don't really know. I don't do a lot with it. I know I got websites in the background that haven't launched yet, but they're all there. I'm at Grifty basically everywhere you can find somebody. So thanks for tuning in. Anybody who's out there, thanks for checking us out, and stay tuned for future announcements and future editions of this series. This is Not a Test, episode 2. Thanks, guys.